So today we're going to take a look at hello and welcome to, let me just confirm if I'm actually online. Which topic would you guys like to take a look at first? We've got learning to combine cycles and Eeevee renders into the same shot. So you can, for example, use cycles for reflections and Eeevee for everything else. We also can take a look at isolating an object to denoise only that one object. And then we're going to have the longer exploration of the animation principles using this Sharky character, which I created for a client called Elias. He was kind enough to say, yeah, use my shark to show the animation principles. So which one would you guys like to take a look at first? Oh, hello, Stev. So Stev, you were the one that asked the question about isolating an object to denoise it, and also how to isolate reflections, right? And Slink was the one that asked about the animation principles. So which one would like to go first? Oh. I guess we'll quickly start with the technical aspect of things. Steve, are you there? Oh, here we go. Sorry, house is full. He's easy. Slink has a... My internet's really slow at the moment. Am I still here?
Yes.
Okay.
It sounds like an odd existential question.
Yes, it does. Am I here? Who am I? Do I exist?
Why am I?
Why am I? So today has been a relatively slow beginning, and I'm not entirely 100% sure I'm live because my Firefox is not loading quickly.
Oh, you are live on Discord. You want me to check your YouTube?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, give it a shot.
Yep, you are live on YouTube.
Thank goodness. Alright, now let's begin. Yep. I'll just erase the beginning of this video in my head and everything, and welcome to the Q&A, the Q&A and critique number 37. So today we're going to take a look at 3 different topics. 2 are very technical. Questions by Stev, who's currently in the chat but not available for the microphone. We're going to be taking a look at using render passes to separate reflections from Eeevee renders. The other one is learning how to separate an object using masks to denoise only that object and nothing else. And then in the third topic, which is a topic that Slink asked last week, which was, what are the animation principles? So we have this can scene that I created a while back with just a free texture from online. And we're going to use this scene and set it up for cycles and Eeevee. And we also have another scene here with this shark kindly provided by one of my old clients, Elias. So I asked him if I could use his shark here to help me, I guess you could say, illustrate the animation principles for today. So let's start with the technical questions, since they're a lot shorter and quick to go over, and then we'll go through the longer topic, which is the shark topic here. I'm not going to explain how I rigged the shark, but basically I'll give you guys a quick understanding of how to animate him, or animate we're using these animation principles in mind. So are you guys ready? Feel free to open up your microphone whenever you want. You will be going live, and this would be probably heard later, but feel free. If you guys want to ask questions, this is kind of like an interactive panel. If you have a topic that you'd like me to explore next week, we can also queue that up. And so feel free, yes? So let's begin, yeah? We'll start with the concept of separating the render passes. Okay, so do you guys know what scene containers are inside Blender?
A scene container, you say?
Exactly.
Actually, never heard of that, actually.
Or a scene, just a normal scene.
Oh, a scene container. Yes, yes.
Okay, so what does it do? What is a scene container?
It is a collection of the options used to actually basically mix the scene.
That's right. So here if we have, for example, in the top right of Blender, if we're here in Blender, we have the scene dropdown and we have a view layer dropdown. So the scene layer dropdown, or the scene tab that we have here on the bottom right in the edit properties panel, this gives us a concept of scenes. Also inside the outliner we have a scene view. So a scene is basically your object, your camera, and your lights. And everything inside the scene, including materials, animation, everything. It's kind of like the top level of all your containers and everything inside the containers. This is the highest level that you can get inside the Blender data. And inside the high level, you also have render settings and view layer settings. So this is where things get really interesting. I'm going to go back to Beef Artist just since I have things here nice and clear. If we take a look here, I have a number of different scenes in the center here, and then I have my view layer collections on the right here, which has these check marks to show which ones are showing, which ones has a holdout, which one has a pass through, and all of the settings that I need with the lights and the actual models and the camera and everything inside a scene. So what I can do is I can copy the settings of the scene to make a new compositing scene. So if I'm in the compositing view and I use nodes, you can see that you have a node called render layers. So a scene container is kind of like a container that holds all the render settings, the render engine, the render dimensions, the frame rate, where the files go to, your color balancing, everything that you need, all the objects, models, and scene and stuff like that. And you can define which scene you want to render. So I'm going to rename the scene here, and I'm just going to call this comp. I'm going to go back to the can that I had, which I think was number 1 floor. I'm going to call this, let me just confirm it's the right one. Nope, it's not this one. Damn, what scene did I just copy? 1 alpha? Floor? Or was it 2 floor? Nope. It was this one, no? So I'll go back to the scene and go back to the composite scene, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the scene that I had earlier, which was one of these. I can't find it. Why? Did I just change it to Blueberry Can 1? There it is. Found it. So I'm just going to call this my render Eeevee scene. Okay? So my render Eeevee scene, if I go back to my scene collections and I switch this to my scene view and just collapse all of them, you can tell that I have my render Eeevee scene and my composite scene. My render Eeevee scene is going to be set up to my render settings with Eeevee, and in my composite scene I'm just going to use whatever, doesn't really matter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this scene. I'm going to do a linked copy. So basically the way scene collections work, which is very similar to containers, is that you can link your data, or you can do a duplicate of the data. Or you can just copy the scene render settings and keep it empty, or delete them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a linked copy, which means the can is going to be one can used in both the scenes. So I have 2 different render settings, but the same can with a linked copy. So let's do that. And I'm going to rename this linked copy called cycles, so that we have 2 versions. So we have the Eeevee version, and let's just make this go to the cycles version. So now we're using 2 different render engines, for the same scene. If we go back to our comp layer in the composite node tree, this is where things start to get interesting. Right? So you guys following? Is it clear basically what a scene collection is?
Yes.
All right. So with that, we got two options. We got the render layers, and then we have a drop down that lists all of the scenes that we want here, including the cycle scene and the Eeevee scene. And it gives us also an ability to select the beauty pass or the shadow pass. So I could use the cycles render engine and use the view layer for shadow, and I could use the Eeevee render engine and use the beauty pass for the rest. And if we go into our add nodes here, and let's just make it nice and big so you guys can see which node I'm going to add in here. If I use a mix color, I guess it's down here, a mix node, I can mix the two render engines together with a factor and the alpha and everything I need, and then I can hit render once by pressing F12 or the render button up here, and this will render the two layers. So if I hit render, what it's going to do basically is it's going to render both the scenes together. Just going to take a moment because this is too big. Let me just drop it down to like 50% and hit render. So now, since I have both scenes loaded in the compositor, I'm able to render both of the scenes in one click or in one individual scene, because I loaded both render layers from the two scenes that I have as kind of like an override, I guess you could say, to render both of them together, to composite them together. And this is how I use cycles and Eeevee in the same render. So how do we set up the reflections then, you ask? So let's go back to the Eeevee render settings and take a look at the camera. Take a look at the material that we have here. We've got, I guess you could say we've got the floor. That's useful. We've got the objects, which is in the camera. We have a holdout object, which we're going to remove. We've got another holdout object here, which I'm going to remove, so I don't need the holdouts. I have a background light. I have all the background lights here. Inside, where did it go? Inside 2, I've got the background material, the planes, the lights and the radiance volume, and the bounce light concept around the reflections. So if we take a closer look, we've got, it's basically 3-point lights, and that's it. But the reflections, as you can see in Eeevee, are terrible. They're not great. They're not good reflections. So let's just drop the samples for preview purposes. If we take a look at our screen space reflections, we've got half res tracing turned off, so the reflections are at the highest that we can have them at, but they just don't look great. But the actual image is okay. I mean, it's a good enough image that we can work with. If we take a look at the scene here, we have a little bit of color balancing set up. If we hit the render button, no, I need to make it smaller, 1 second. For preview purposes. If you guys are using Blender, I mean, it's the same concept. You have your scenes in the outliner, you have your scene data here, you have your compositing up here. So inside the compositing, you go to use nodes, and then you have your render layer, the render layer with the drop down scene that you want to choose, and the view layer you want to render. So let's go back here. Let's just drop the resolution down to 50%, or even, 25%, so it's really quick. So we can take a look here. So if we hit the render button inside the render layer, here's the scene. And as you can tell, the reflections are terrible. So let's go into our cycles render. And what we want to do now is we want to remove the holdout. remove just keep the lighting from the set, and we'll get the correct can. So let me just go into my main view, go back into my view layers. This is the blueberry can, we've got the floor. So for example, this reflection on the floor here, if we want only the reflection, what I can do is I can duplicate this collection. I'm going to call this the reflections collection. And I'm going to hide the original one. And now I'm going to get the paper ground and just set up some key material overrides. So this floor here, if I only want the reflections and not the color, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a, I guess you could say, reflection, a glossy BSDF. Just swap it over, and using the glossy BSDF, make it black with the correct roughness, or a little bit white, to kind of get the reflection. Go inside the render engine. Just make sure I am rendering at 50%, making sure my samples are low. GPU. Denoise it. Adaptive sampling. Make it time limit 10 seconds. Don't denoise. And why can't I see anything? Where is everything? That's weird. Today is just not the day. Why?
Maybe everything's like a holdout or something. I don't know.
Shouldn't be.
Or it is a shadow catcher, like.
Is it set to render both layers?
Maybe it's the engine.
I mean, there's a setting that you have to flip to render both layers and not just a single one for the scene.
It's true beauty.
Maybe Cycles doesn't like SSGI shader.
Yeah, this is an old scene where I use the SSGI. Damn. That means
Also,
okay.
I would probably do it with like passes, like you can get the reflection pass of Cycles and so on and so on.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see if I can load up another scene that I had for you guys. The scene from last week. The same one with the box. Where is that scene though? Because then it might be easier to work with. But yeah, combined. Cycles, we got combined, denoising data, UV, sure, denoising data, normal, position, light. So here in the light, we would have the glossy direct and indirect in color. And diffuse we don't really need. So I'll just get rid of the combined. Or keep it. But you can choose anything you want from your AOVs. So in the view layers, this is where you define your AOVs, and then you can use your AOVs inside the compositing of the tree. But I probably need to redefine the principled shader. Let me just use the principled normal one. Shader, principled BSDF. There we go. Plug that into the color, plug that into here. Make sure the metallic is the same. Specular is the same. Sheen is the same. Sheen tint is the same. Clear coat is the same. I wish you could just plug in these values. Everything else is okay. Subsurface is not used. And then see if the render is fixed. That's the label. Brushed aluminum. This is what happens when you use an old project. Principled BSDF. Select into the base color. Select into the metallic. Select into the roughness. And the normal. Throw it into here. and see what's up. Metallic should be, no, sorry, this just goes into roughness. Hello. We're just troubleshooting a scene to see why it's not rendering. For some reason, it's just not rendering. Still can't see anything. Wonder if it's the build. Let's just save this as a new version and load up another build. 3.2. Or we can just build it from here. Thanks guys for the patience. So in theory, what you can do is you get... So in theory, you take the cycles reflection pass or AOV from the cycles scene, and then you get your Eeevee diffuse and your Eeevee whatever else that you want for time or speed, or a different render setting. So it could be like cycles with a more optimized setting with no reflection, so it's super quick. And then you can, and the global illumination steps and everything, and then you can use a separate denoised reflection pass, I guess you could say, and use the compositor to combine it back in. So let's load up that scene in my study material, scenes, rendering. Go back to the can, hopefully it renders this time. Go back into cycles. What? What's going on?
Magic.
That's so bizarre. I had it working earlier just before you guys were here. Oh well.
Is it by any chance the fact that you're streaming your screen or your window?
Possibly. So
Call yourself a professional.
Yeah, I call myself a professional.
I'm definitely getting a refund after this.
Oh dear. Let me just open it, open up the box scene and work from there. The one that we had with the other sharpness. And hopefully this can work from there. Downloads, dovetail box, DDDD. So Steve, since your mic is, there we go, Cycles is working. So I have the render test, I'll call this Cycles. Let's make a copy. Eeevee.
We're on it.
Say that again.
Sorry, I was talking to my wife. It's the middle of dinner time here, so I do apologise.
That's no problem. Though I did want to ask you, what is the context of why you wanted to separate the two passes or the reflections from one object to another?
Theoretically, or the reason that I was asking was, I had an object, so it's a product render, but the glass I was getting, I wanted everything denoised apart from the glass.
Mm-hmm.
So really a render, I could separate the render layers. I think that's what I was getting at. Originally, I wanted to be able to control the reflection. So you know how you get product shots and you get something like glass, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have like a light on the glass. So generally I would do a reflection and I would pipe that into something like the mapping. Is that not made any sense at all?
No, that makes sense to me. So it would be
Yeah,
using...
sorry, there's way too many distractions in this house at the moment to have a coherent conversation.
That's okay.
But,
Today is a bit
but
like
generally
that.
when you're doing product, generally when you're doing product shots, you want a nice reflection, but you don't want you want to be able to control that reflection either by an object or by a separate texture or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So having a separate render pass for that always helps. But being able to denoise certain objects in the scene it'd be handy, because like a lot of the plastics, denoising's fine, but like on the left hand side of the machine, for example, you'd be using a noise texture, and the denoiser would just go, it would just shaft it. Pretty much. Pretty much. I ended up just rendering 2 different machines and just overlaying it.
Awesome animation.
Pretty much. It was only coming in at about 30 minutes of render, so you know what I mean. Plus, it means I could kind of cherry pick the bits that I wanted off the machine.
What the other day?
Aye, pretty much.
Under there. There we go. Cool. So finally, I actually have the passes that I need. I got my alpha pass. I got my glossy diffuse or direction, my glossy indirect, my glossy color, or I guess you could say, yep, the glossy color. I got the noisy image, and I also have the denoise data, the image, and everything I need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to control the glossy direction, glossy indirection, basically, to kind of get my reflections sorted. So specifically the glossy direction, which is here on the ground. So I can control the lighting of this. So now I have my cycles render, and if I render out my Eeevee render, let's just take a quick look to see how it looks. So I just render that out. So here's my Eeevee. I can see be stuck. So this is a bit more. So if I my mode, I have there my AOVs of the cycles render, and now I can mix and match between one and the other. This render took a couple seconds, this render took 1 minute, so I could do 1 minute for the reflections and 20 seconds for as many boxes as I want, and then work from there. So if I go into my add and get my color, make this panel bigger so you guys can see, I can now use a mix node to bring in the correct data that I need. So if I bring in my diffuse and mix in, for example, the glossy direction, I can start to like drive in usually I use overlay or screen, sorry.
In the Blender manual, you can look like how cycles like comps all these things together to one render, and you could use that. Wait a minute.
As like a ground zero. So in the cycles one, I also probably need to get my cryptomat. So let me just activate that. So in the cryptomat, I need the object and possibly levels. I just want 4 levels maybe. Accurate mode, and then I'm good. So in my cryptomat, where's the data? So the cryptomat work is basically which one's a holdout, which one is affecting the reflections or not. You could use the cryptomat to define cycles, the nation of images, like that. The image class is the crypto data. Oh man, today's a big waste of time. I'm sorry for that, guys.
No, you.
Where is my cryptomat? It just gets the image data from cycles. Crypto object, mate ID. But where is the pass? Oh, maybe I'm not defining it correctly. Yeah, how stupid.
I like watching problem solving. It's good.
Yeah?
You're not wasting my time. I just go,
Yeah, this is
oh
like,
shit.
90% of actual client work is
Pretty
you know what
much.
you're doing, and then shit just breaks, and you spent the majority of your time figuring out how to fix it.
Yeah, that happens all the time. So now I have the crypto mats, so now I probably need to re-render. So
And keeping in mind, I know you also built a 360 camera and Eevee to do volumetrics, so you kind of know what you're talking about. So, in case anybody doesn't know, we had to render an Eevee in 360. So, Andreas basically set up each camera to compile at the end to make one big image, which was quite fancy, to be honest. It was a technical marvel. It did the job.
did have some painters on the scene because the way it's calculated. So lights behind the camera were not being evaluated.
Yeah, but even just a straight up 360 render in Eevee was possible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was only really volumetrics that caused an issue.
Right, you're right. There we go, my cryptomat, finally. As you can see, each object has a color. And this color is the ones that I can use to mask out different things. So inside my image, I can select what you got to do is you got to go to the crypt object 01. You click the plus sign and you choose, for example, this green. And what this green does is it brings out the mask of that object. So you can grab the sides or you can choose the front. This is like it adds the different pieces of the models that you have inside the scene as a mask, which is super useful for masking out your details. So for example, if I want the reflections, I can use this mate mask to bring out or invert this mask to bring out the colors that I need in the rest of my scene. So my color management, I'm just going to go back to standard for now. So it's like white. Go into my factor here. I'm going to use this matte inside the factor and then just swap the inputs so that I now have the Eevee model with the cycles reflection. So here's the cycle, the Eevee version with no reflections on the ground. It looks shockingly terrible. And now if I use the mask and look into that again, I can actually have some proper reflections. So here's the reflection with cycles, and here it is without cycles here. So I just used the cycles cryptomat and the cycles reflection data that will be used as an AOV, or the glossy direction, to mix in using the cryptomat mask or matte mask to mix in two different render engines with two different settings. I could also, in fact, use the AOVs from this render settings of cycles to say, hey, render everything at 32 samples and denoise like crazy, but render the reflections at like 64 samples with a whole bunch of glossy rays, but no diffuse, no bounce light, no caustics, no nothing else, to optimize that particular light ray calculation and then combine it back in using this system. So that's the bare bones system that you can use using scene collections. Which are like render containers, I guess you could say, to bring it back in using this one particular scene. And at the end of the day, if I want to render all of these passes, I just need to render once, which is this composite scene, and it will render all of my chained scenes together to bring out what I need. This is also very handy for like splitting up your lighting, splitting up your characters, splitting up the background, foreground, midground, splitting up data between the grass and the hair, splitting up the water, splitting up everything you need, the clouds, the volumetrics. A good trick that I use is, for example, render the beautiful stuff in cycles and then render the volumetrics with Eeevee. And then composite the Eeevee volumetrics back in. Another thing that I like to do that I did with another project was render each character separately and then composite the characters back together again with the correct lighting that I wanted. So this is a very industry standard system, super powerful. That's if you work the scene collections here. So these scene collections with the linked copy, the copy settings, or the full copy will give you that. And with that, you can use the same concept of a cryptomat to kind of drop, for example, if I only wanted, let's just remove an object, and I only wanted to denoise the lid, for example. If I wanted to only denoise the lid, what I could do is I can use this mat to create and then use the denoise data and mask the denoise data before I put it through the denoise node. So let's do that right now. So let's get, for example, a alpha over node. This is my filter, what I'm going to use. I'm going to use the mat. Or no, wait, hang on. Let's get the denoise node. So I need the noisy image. Get the denoise node. And as you can see, this image, I can use this image with the mat here to kind of create a filter. So to create the filter, I'm going to use either alpha over or a mixed node. I don't remember which one works best. I select the noisy image into the alpha over. I'm going to make sure like a random color, swap it around. So the alpha over is over everything, as you can see. So I'm going to use the mat and the factor, and now I have just isolated in the background here. I've managed to isolate the lid. So I'm going to just make this black, and I've got the lid as with my alpha over node, and I plug that in. Boom. I do the same for the other three things, so I don't need the mixed node. So I get the same mat, put that in, get the denoise normal data, and I'll make it black. Oh, sorry, the second one here. Put that into the normal. Do the same for the albedo data, denoise data. The same mat for the lid, and then put it over black, put it into the albedo. Then denoise. I'm going to get the original image over here. Then I'm going to denoise back onto the image. If we do the denoise data over here, back to the image, and take a while. It's as you know, the denoise is not accurate right now, so let's just also probably turn to low. There we go, good. So now we have, if we go to the data, here's the pile, and then we use the alpha over and added the noise data using the cryptomat as a filter, I guess you could say, to mask out just that piece that I wanted to denoise in that particular way. Which is, that's how you would work that. Does it answer your question, Steve? Oh, Darren's here, and Collapsy. Pyloaf is writing. Okay, so Slink mentioned to rebuild your scenes inside the compositor. You basically use There's structure inside the cycles data, which you can find in the chat, where you get the diffuse direct plus the diffuse indirect. Then you multiply by the...
Plus means add.
Yep, and
X
then
means multiply.
multiply. That's right. So you add the glossy to the glossy indirect, and then you multiply the glossy color. Same thing with transmission direct, and then you multiply by the color, and you combine it all together with add, emission and environment. So this is kind of like a chain of trees. Eeevee is a little bit different because you don't get as much AOVs, but it's a similar process. So Pylov says, I don't know if it answers the question that was asked, but it's super interesting. You never knew you could combine different passes from different engines. That is correct, you can. You could also do the same with Octane or any other add-on that has a different render system. You could use Bear. So it's like, take the car, a Lux Core, yeah, exactly. You could mix and match the strengths and weaknesses and give you some compositing flexibility if you use the internal compositor. So a lot of people say don't realize how powerful this is. Basically, most typical workflows is you render everything as an EXR. This would be one EXR, this would be another EXR, and then you use an external compositing software to combine it back together again. And what a pain that is. You know, like you'll be using gigs and gigs and gigs of data of EXR data files. By the way, if you want animation EXR files, use the PXR24 format. Zip.
Or
Format.
don't.
Yeah, or DWAA, which is like lossy, but it's like really high quality. Still, you'll get like
Yeah, but the
really small file sizes.
Yeah, that's good, yeah. But the industry standard for animation is PXR24. That was designed specifically for animation. So it's kind of like a PNG, I guess you could say, almost. If you want still images, for example, an HDRI background, then yeah, ZipS is the one you go with. But DWAA, I haven't used that one a lot, but I'll have to read up on that one. But yeah. So that's the old way, right? I'll say that again.
I mean, that's I know a lot of people that still use that workflow just because you have a lot of control still when you render like a multi-layer EXR sequence and then use like Nuke or After Effects. But yeah, it's the same workflow. You just, are you doing it on Blender? Are you doing it in an external compositor?
And fun fact though, the Blender compositor is actually quite powerful when it comes to processing data. I was running 8K animations with Fusion and it was choking, and Blender just took it like a champ. 8K HDRI files.
It's good.
So give it a shot. Like it does process and handle things. Just remember, like, turn on OpenCL. This is your GPU. Buffer groups means the grouped nodes are a little bit quicker. 2 passes means it will calculate the easy stuff first, so you can see quickly, and then the hard stuff second. And when you go into edit mode, change in your performance, change it to low, so things are very faster to render. And make sure your chunk sizes are relative to how your processor works. Higher is usually better if you're on OpenCL. Lower is if things become extremely difficult or too big, and then it will work better with things like CPU. The execution mode, full frame, is an experimental feature which you can turn on inside preferences, experimental data, and turn on your full frame compositor. But full frame is a lot faster because instead of render the full frame on all your resources makes everything run slower and a lot more RAM and everything, but it is a lot faster also. So those little tips to speed compositor. So this is the first 2 technical questions. The one is like, okay, so how do I split up an object from another? Is use the cryptomat, so I can denoise just that one object and everything else no, and composite back in using alpha overnodes. How do I use 2 multiple render engines from the same scene? Well, use scene collections with linked data and different view layers and different render settings, and then use a compositor. and another third scene to render both of them together. And that's how you can provide it together. And how to optimize the compositor just a little bit. So are you guys ready for some animation principles?
Yes.
Finally, we managed to get through the barking dogs, through the crashed computer, through the bugged scene, and now we're here. Thanks guys for being patient and hanging out to this point. Alright, so I have a question for you guys. Who here has animated characters before, or has animated anything before?
Pain.
Kalopsy, nice. Pyloaf has done 2D animation. Slink says it's painful. But not in Blender. Oh, what software were you using to animate? Traditional. Nice, well done. Lich has done some animation too. Oh, Light Table. Oh, cool. I haven't used that before. Okay, well, I'll give you guys a quick rundown of my animations. They're not incredible, let me tell you that, but it's something. So basically, animation is a workflow, a process. It's just like everything else in 3D. It is also a very kinetic and intuitive exercise. So, do you guys know how to dance, or have you guys done a theater on a stage? Do you guys play sport?
I have lived.
You have?
I have lived.
You've lived. Have you guys played sport? You guys know how to like kick a ball and run around and do stuff? Or ride a bike? Competitive gymnast. Lich has done, wow, that's impressive, Pyloaf, that's really cool. Lich has done visual effects animation, not much soft body work. He's done a couple of walk cycles, that's good. Okay, so let's, what about you, Pyloaf? You mentioned you've done animation 2D, which I think gives you a huge advantage. And you've done competitive gymnast, which is like a huge amount of body control. That's incredible, with physics, weight, movement. Kalopsy as well, he's writing. What have you animated, Kalopsy? Oh, wait. Yeah, Kalopsy says, did you ever ride a bike? Laughing his ass off. Alright, yeah. So basically, if you guys understand a little bit about physics and understand a little bit about observation and how your body moves and things like that, a little bit of kinetic things, animation is basically capturing that process and translating it and forcing the software and the character to do that. So let's take a look at this character rig that I have here. He's called Sharky. Sharky by Elias. This was a rig that I created a while back. He is pure bones. He's got a whole bunch of visibility controls. He's got expressions already built into him, so he can be sad whenever I want him to be. He's a nice little sad shark. Or he can be angry, which is kind of freaky. Rawr. There he is, Mr. Angry here.
Angry.
Yep, I can make him scared or frightened. What? What? And I've got the animation built inside the rig to how I want him to be. What? So he's a good fun character. So in the chat here I have this concept. Okay, oops, sorry, let me just take a look. Pyloaf has clarified he hasn't animated in a few years, but he's done walk cycles for bipedal characters and quadrupedal, which are ones with 4 legs. And his attempts of gymnastics animations are human movements and with weight transfer. Lots of exercises to understand movement. Excellent. That's exactly how you begin. Because basically, there are 3 things that you need to think about with animation. There's weight, the weight of how heavy something is. You need to think about the inertia, the movement of how fast something is, or how much pressure is pushed against the weight. And then you need to think about I guess you could say, the attitude or the emotions, the story, the expression. So you got to think of your weight, your inertia, or movement. So one is like the static gravity that the earth is pulling you through or from, and the impulse of how something moves, the push, the energy you put into something that moves, and then the actual intention of your movement, what you want to do with it, how you want to make him think or look or act or do, and things like that. So are you guys ready to take a look at the 12 principles? Oh, Collapsy has uploaded a whole bunch of really cool animations. Let's take a look at them. The Trident run test. Very good, way better than me. In my animations, you've also done a walk test. Well done. You got a sword combo test. These are really cool. So you know what you're talking about. I think you're probably the best animator here right now, so you can't really take my word for it. No Brainer says Discord sucks. Well, look at that. Big heavy bag. Boom, 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 boom. He's got super powerful legs. Nice work, Collapsy. Okay, so have you guys heard of the 12 principles of animation before? Do you guys have any idea what it's about? So according to this guy Fernando Herrera, an animation supervisor at Framestore, which is a very big studio, he kind of split up the 12 principles into 3 groups, all in the concepts of appeal. So he has them in 3 groups. One is called a mindset principle, the other one is an observation principle, and the other one is a technique. So like I mentioned earlier, you have your inertia as a concept of observation. Like when you look at a ball and you kick a ball, something keeps on moving with an overlapping action. And to either kick the ball, you need to swing your leg back and then hit the ball with your leg. That's some anticipation. And with secondary action, when you hit the ball with your leg, your foot kind of bounces and wobbles a little bit as the ball flies away. These are observation principles that comes from physics of the concepts of weight and impulse. So let's enough talking. Let's take a look at this. If we want to move the shark here, I'm going to go into my animation view, and we're going to be practical. We're going to take a look at the shark, and we're going to move him forward and then break. Basically, what I'm going to use is basically the transform control, which is the global transform control, and just move him. So if I hit I to record, I can choose my location and rotation. So I'll click that. It records in the top right here. This is the root of my rig. So from there, what I need to do is, like, over time, he needs to reserve some energy or prepare some energy. So he's going to pull back a bit, and then he's going to move forward nice and quickly. But because he moved forward so quickly, he's going to overshoot a little bit, and then he's going to pull back a bit. So if we take a look at the animation nice and quickly, boom. He's moved, we've got a little bit of anticipation, and then he moves forward, and then he pulls back. So we have some idea that he's moving forward a little bit. Okay? So that's the concept of observation skills, is where you have the idea that he's a little bit heavy and he needs energy to move. The weight and the energy. So you pull him back to get some energy, then you pull him forward. Now we got to go back to the rule here where we have inertia and overlapping action with anticipation, and now secondary action. So with these techniques of principles, the secondary action kind of leads up into the concept of staging, timing, spacing, arcs, and solid posing. So just to get an idea, we're going to break it through. I have this control at the top of his head to kind of like squash and stretch him a little bit. So I'm going to just record his location and rotation of this. So, and just make sure I have this as full. With his head control, when he's pulling back, I'm going to make sure this is a secondary animation here. So just pull his head back a little bit, like this. Maybe pull out his jaw a little bit, or his mouth. Let's pull that out a bit. There we go. And with that, just reset all his controls a little bit so that it's recorded. So when he's pulling back, the secondary animation of his tail, for example, or location rotation, put it back down. So I pull this back, pulls his tail in, maybe pull it back even more. So he's pulling his tail in with this control here to kind of hold up the energy, get his energy all stored up, and then he's going to kick his tail out. So he kind of kicks with his tail, and then it gets pulled in, and just after his tail comes in a little bit, and just make sure it's big like that. His tail comes in, and his body pulls back a little bit, and then he starts braking, holding up his energy, and then he rests. Okay, so with that in mind, I can control. See, the tail kicks back, and then it drags in. Boom. If we go full screen this, whoop. And then he just kind of pulls himself back a little bit with the weight of his body to hold him back, and woo, woo. So that concept of, if we take a look at the rules again, we have the concept of secondary action, which is kind of like what happens to his head, what happens to his tail, what happens to his flippers, his eyes, his expression, and we start creating some timing. So animation is a 4D, I guess you could say, a 4D art, where you have a idea that you have X, Y, and Z to move your concept, but you also have this 1D timeline, which is time. So you got to work through your time and then work through that, and then you're good to go. Pylef has mentioned a really good book, which is the Animated Survival Kit by Richard Williams, which is a kind of like the animator's Bible of how to animate. Lots of useful information. So Collapsy says he would have needed 2 hours to do that. He works very slowly. Pylef says, yeah, the book is very good. I agree. So let's go back. Let's break down the things that I just had to figure out a little bit. And also his tail is kind of inside his body too much. So let me just make sure it's like this. Whoop, boom. And bring his tail down just a little bit to kind of kick it. And then bring it back out again. Whoop. And then he's brakes. So the concept of staging is, okay, so the three things you have in mind: gravity and energy. Gravity, energy. That's everything it has. Body mechanics. Awesome. But now you need to think about story. So when it comes to staging is kind of like, I got to set up a camera. If I go into this camera here and go into the camera view here and just lock the camera, I need to set up a world, I guess you could say. So let's get some primitives. Let's just add in a ground. Here's the bottom of the sea. Let's just add in a sphere to kind of show like he's kind of around the world like this. We'll have some staging here, and I'm going to just rotate around him a little bit. And this is what you call staging. So staging is like lining up your camera setting up your world, to kind of set up what you want to do. And maybe I'm going to use like a tiny little cube, and I need to think about the story. So in the concept of story, I need him to do something to explain him, like maybe he's going to eat this cube. Yeah. So this is the part of staging. You prepare everything for an action. So I'm going to use the sphere here to kind of help me stage where the cube is at using my compositing rules like this. And I'm going to use this kind of underwater scene with the camera here, and he's going to eat the cube. So that's my staging. So these are the technique principles where you got to think about how you make it look good. This is about the story. It's always about story. So now we got to think about timing. So we have a little cube he's going to eat. We have the world he's in. We have a concept of, okay, so what's the timing? Let's grab the rig, and I'm going to shift all of the keyframes over, and I'm going to say, okay, this is going to be a 30 second, I'm using 30 frames per second. So I want a 5-second animation. So now let's take a look at my timeline, and I'm going to do some markers. I'm going to move the end to here. I'm going to say he's going to move kind of like here really quickly. And at the beginning here, so I can say, I press M for marker. M for marker, assign a shortcut, which I don't have. M for marker, Control M to assign a name to the marker. I'm going to call this the jump. At the beginning, I'm just going to call this M for marker, and I call this, I guess, the look around. So this is my timing, right? He's going to look around, maybe about here. He's going to, I guess you could say, see the cube, right? And then after that, he's going to jump, and right at the end here, about here, in this jump here, he's going to eat the cube. And then at the end, right about in the halfway point, he's going to smile because he's happy he ate the cube. All right? Does it make sense? All right, so that's timing. Timing is kind of like, okay, so how do I define the story over time? What happens, and then what happens, and then what happens for how long, and then what happens. It's a sequence of events. That is timing. Once you have your timing sorted, you got to think about your spacing. Spacing is kind of like, I noticed that here I have the jump, which is pretty fast, and then he's going to smile closer to the end, I guess. So like you're in shock for a moment, and then he smiles. So that's the spacing concept, and also your distance between things. So if we go back to our scene here, let's block it out. So he's going to look around. So I'm going to animate his, I guess you could say, his squash and stretch controls. So I'm going to make him look to the left a little bit, like this, with this control here. Maybe not too much. Like this, maybe with his eyes. And whoops, that's his nose. Sorry, his eye control is this one. So make him look to the left a little bit. Hold it for a moment. Make it keep him kind of just sitting there. And then I'm going to look to the right. Whoop. Bring his tail around. And make him look to the right a little bit. And then I'm going to like rotate his head a little, so he's looking to the right a little bit. So he's there. I also got to probably reset his rotation at the beginning. So he looks to the left, then he looks to the right with the follow through, which means he's got to look more to the right over here. And then he looks to the front. Whoop. So reset his views, and then he sees the cube over here in the front, and he's like, huh? Opens up his jaw a little bit. What? And we'll pull out his lip a little bit, or pull back his jaw, make it smaller a little bit, so we don't clip it. I'll probably keep his mouth closed at this point, you know, maybe up here like this. So he looks to the left. Gotta make sure his jaw is still closed. Which one is it? This one? I'm probably gonna hide his teeth, so just give me a moment to make his mouth more minimal. His teeth, which one are his teeth? Gums. The other ones, the lips. I think this one's the teeth. No. Which one's the teeth? Oh, it's this one here, down here. Hide the teeth controls. Good. So I have the side control here. Cool. Right, so he's looking to the right. Make his mouth is kind of like this. So he looks to the left, holds it a little bit. Just make sure his mouth is correct. And then he looks to the right. And then I need to make sure he holds it. So this animation here, what I can do is I can make a keyframe go to here, to this moment, at this point, at frame 41. I can go to my pose mode. And with my in-between controls, or here in the tools, I can use my breakdowner. And in my breakdowner, I can pull it to the left a little bit to hold it, and then click, and it would record a new frame. So he holds his animation, and then he turns. Same with his jaw. So I can pull back a little bit, click, and then hold. So he kind of holds there, and then he goes, then he turns. And opens his mouth. Boom. So let's take a quick look. Whoa. But as you can see, it's very fast. Whoop, whoop, boom. Let's just make sure my playback is on Eeevee sync. Yes, it is. So this is where I need to think about timing and staging and spacing of my acting to make sure that my block out is good. So I'm going to select all the keyframes to see them all. And I'm going to hold at this point. So I'm going to select all these keyframes, stretch it out. And then turn, and then again hold for more time, and then pull around, and then hold a bit more, and then he jumps. Woo. So let's take a look. Woo. There we go, a little bit better. Maybe he needs to hold the first look a bit more. So this is how you start to do some block out. Typically a professional animator, he would use this in constant keyframes to kind of set up the way it works. So here he's looking to the left, and then he turns too quickly, so I'm going to pull this over a bit more. So look to the left, look to the right, turn. Look to the left, hold it a bit more. Look to the left, look to the right, and hold it again. Look to the right, and then hold. Boom. Left, right, and then jump. Lengthen the animation. Look to left, look to the right, then hold it. Boom. Then he jumps in. And the whole part about the jumping in could be faster. So I use the scale button. Then whoop. Whoop. Now it's a bit more, it's understanding. The timing is a lot more understandable based on the story. Maybe his turn is a little bit too quick. So I can pull that turn out a little bit. And there we go. So I've blocked out the animation, and this brings up to the rule of, we've got the concept of observation principles of inertia, overlapping action, anticipation. This is what we use for like cleaning up the animation and making the animation look realistic. And the staging, the technique principles, which is your story one, we need some solid posing, we need spacing and timing. So now the solid posing is the concept of silhouette. So if we take a look at this black and white view here, we go to flat mode, and we can see that we can't see his arm, right? So here we have the view, the silhouette is nice and clear. This is excellent. This is all we needed right here. Maybe his teeth could be improved. We can bring back his mouth a little bit, like maybe like bring it out to the side a little. And maybe bring back his whoops, where is his other mouth controls? Let's get these ones. No, maybe it's this one here. Oh, whoops, these are hiding. Show. There we go. So I'm going to grab this dark purple one. pull back his mouth a little so we can see his jaw. And let's just animate everything. Okay, so now we bring that in. And this view here, like right at this moment, doesn't look so good. So what I can do is I can bring out his tail. I can fix his jaw a little bit, or his mouth, to kind of show, maybe I can bring out his flipper, or make it like an actual IK control. Bring out his flipper, bring out this flipper as well, so that I can see it. Maybe I can even straighten out his head a little bit to kind of make him kind of look like he's looking at around a little bit. Maybe I can play with his eyes, maybe bring out his eye a little bit to kind of show that he's looking up over that way. Maybe even exaggerate with this one. Fix up the mouth movement. And this is the concept of the shape design of your animation. The solid posing. When you have a very clear pose in the language of silhouette, we're like this, it helps the user understand what is happening in the actual animation in a very clear and precise way. This is your solid posing. If your poses between the different resting movements of action are clear, then you'll be able to communicate what he needs to say much more clearly. He's looking to the left, and then he's looking to the right. And you just got to make sure that your posing is nice and clean between the two things, right? And after that, we got the last technique of arcs. So if we take a look at the animation, it's very linear, especially here. Whoop, whoop. Notice the action between his eyes here are very straight. This action here has no arc. It's a very straight, flat movement. So this is the other principle of your animation, where you need to think about your strategies of keeping your arcs nice and clean. So what is an arc? Do you guys know?
Curved path.
Curve path, yeah, that's nice and simple. And also Slink has said Alt S is for scaling things. He needs to learn to animate for a whole entire month or something. There are some free rigs from Blender, which is good to from the demo files that you can take a look at. And also Pylof has asked, what am I using to reset transformation? It's usually Alt GSR, or if you're in BFR, it's Alt WER, or go to your pose option, clear transforms, clear location, clear rotation, or clear scale, and you can just assign them to whatever hotkey you want, really, or clear user transforms, or all, or whatever. So those are the ones that you use for clearing. So in this eye movement, what we're going to do is I'm going to bring the character down about halfway like this to bring his eye down, and I'm going to squash him down a little bit. Maybe bring it back up so he's whoop, and then bring his head back up again, and then to rest again, to kind of help that whoop, to kind of show that his eye movement has got an arc. Whoop, it kind of goes up and then down. If we go back into this view here, he's whoop, he goes down and then up. That is an arc. So instead of a straight movement from left to right, it's going down and then up. Whoop, whoop, which is the way the world works. The world works with like joints and movement that goes in circles. Energy moves around like with gravity, and impulse will always create a circle. A ball curves down to the earth. It goes up in a curve and then down to the earth again. Because of the concept of energy, or push with gravity. So that creates a curve. So when we move our arm, when we move our fingers, when we move our legs and our bodies and our head and everything, it's always in a curve. So with this ball-like creature, which is the shark, you're going to have to think about how to add curves to him, because he's a ball. So in this concept here, which is straight, I would have to do the same. Whoop, whoop, and then do the same. Whoop, make sure he does a curve with his eyes and his mouth instead of the straight angular movement. This is very unnatural. So I'm have to do the same, start adding that in to my actual character. Then I can do the same with this movement. Especially here, I could instead of making him move straight, I can make him go rah, like a curve, rah, jump in, rah, or from the bottom, rah, or from the side, rah, instead of straight. So those are the principles basically of how you set up your animation. There's a couple more, which is using exaggeration, contrast, and mixed workflow. These are more about how you do your animation and also how much of the story do you emphasize. It's very similar to when you're talking. Which words are more important and which one is less important? Which one is a happy sound and which one is an angry sound? How do you exaggerate it? How do you make it more crazy, or how do you make it more serious? How do you make it more sad and like upsetting? You know, you gotta, and then how you do that with either animation of straight ahead, which is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the frames from A to B, or from pose to pose, which is like pose A, pose B, pose C, then fix everything in between, which is what I just did now, which I find to be very efficient. Or use a mixture of both, you know, like with his tail, I would probably be using straight ahead, but with his poses and expressions, I'll be using pose to pose. So you use a mixture of techniques within the 3D software to create your animation. So, crash course. I hope it wasn't too crazy, and I hope it makes sense. Thanks for hanging out here for all this time. Pylov says thank you. No, thank you for hanging out. Do you guys have more questions about this? Do you want me to go in depth? Inside the Q&A and critique, there is actually a very cool YouTube series called The 12 Principles of Animation by Alan Becker. It's about 20 minutes, a lot faster than me, but I recommend you watch his videos to get a very, very clear and concise concept of what these principles are. And also the tweet by Fernando Herrera from Frame Store. His concept I really like a lot because it's a lot more split up into pieces. I highly recommend his tweet as well. So, do you have any questions before I finish the stream? Slink is writing, why am I so good?
Now, as always, Dre's, that was some very helpful technical information. Much appreciated.
There it is, kind of rendered. Hey, it looks great. I'm glad I hope it's useful. I mean, animation to me is one of the most gratifying, fun, and satisfying aspects of 3D. When you see your character or your model become alive. When you animate something, it is highly satisfying. This is one of the parts of animation that I really like, that I wish I did more, but I'm always caught up in the technical aspect of 3D. But I wish I did more animation because I look at my characters, and when I do a good job of it, and I do it nice and quickly, I just laugh. I literally laugh at myself, sitting alone at the desk like a madman, because it's so fun. It's fun to see the character come alive. And I highly recommend it to at least understand the principles, which also helps you to design your characters better. It also helps you to understand how to rig and why you should rig. It also helps you understand how to animate your text and work your timing with your motion graphics and things like that. Like, animation principles also helps you to be a lot more aware of time and how things move. And you take notice, like, that person walks in a very cool way, or that person eats in a very interesting way, or the way that person's standing and carries his weight is extremely interesting. You know, you start to notice the way the hips and the spine and everything move around because of weight. and inertia and the energy of push and movement, and then the intention of the character, what they're thinking and how they're thinking and why are they thinking that way with the hand in their mouth, why are they touching their nose, things like that. Animation it opens your eyes to how the world moves, and that's a beautiful thing. Being aware of time it's a beautiful aspect of 3D. So I highly recommend you give it a go. With any free rig can do. Just try to work the principles, try to work on different like movement, and try to work on short little stories, short little intentions, and you can work something out. Obviously this animation needs a lot more work. If you only manage to do 10 seconds a day, that's okay. A professional animator at DreamWorks, he averages between 30 and 1 minute of animation per up to 7 characters in a full day using blockout. It's not finished polished animation. If you do 10-15 seconds per day of polished animation, you're as good as a professional. So take it easy, yeah? Collapses 10 seconds a day, you need 4 to 5 seconds. Lech also agrees animation is one of the greatest achievements. Slink says for now animation is painful. He says MBLab also creates a rig, but it isn't as professional. So Klopsy says 10 seconds a day, I need 4 or 5 days for 5 seconds. Yeah, I think that's relatively realistic, but I'm telling you, this is 10 seconds of blockout, like constant blockout, which is very easy. Like the more refined your blockout is, which is the constant keyframes. So for example, if I select all my controls, select all the keyframes, and I convert this to constant, this is what you would call blockout. So they do about 10 seconds of refined blockout of between 2s and 3s, which is like every 2 frames or every 3 frames. They set this up. They will do about 10 seconds of that a day, even 30 seconds sometimes, with up to 7 characters. So they're crazy fast, but they just know the principles. Bang, 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 bang. And they know the rigs well, and they get it going. But that's I guess the professional grade of how fast you want to animate, but generally it takes a lot of effort. But obviously the more time you spend in planning your animation, the more time you spend in blocking your animation, like the more effort you do in your blocking, the less time it's going to take to polish your animation. So if you have a very strong foundation, the whole building is going to look great. If you have a terrible foundation, the whole building is going to collapse, right? So you got to put more time into your blockout or your blocking than you do into polishing, and you'll be okay. Yeah, concerning polishing, they usually spend a bit more time, but with cinema, like you have your lead animators, they do most of the blockout. Or you have a couple of animators. Yeah, measure twice, cut once, says Lech. That is exactly what it's about. Collapsy needs about the same amount of time for blocking and polishing of each. Yeah. With me, I'm very lazy with my polishing, so I usually put more time into blocking. Slink is writing. Collapsy puts up this gif of a chainsaw. Alright guys, well I've been here 1 hour and a half. Today was an extra long day. Thank you for your patience at the beginning of this session. I hope you found it interesting and useful. I can't wait to see more animations here in the server, and I hope you guys kind of get your feet wet with the concept, because it is very, very satisfying. So thanks for your time. Cuts the finger. Bye. Thanks for hanging out till the end. And I'll just stop the stream here.